Welcome to the Blind Exorcist. This is Justin D., your host. We are up to episode 33. Thank you so much for tuning in yet again. I always start with that because I'm very appreciative of each of you coming back and listening. And if you are new here, welcome. I know you're going to enjoy today's episode. Those of you who have been listening for a while understand that I mention the name Dr. Bob Larson quite often on here because this is the exorcist who trained me, mentored me, and certified me to become an exorcist under his ministry. And today, I've had the wonderful opportunity of finally getting to sit down and interview Dr. Bob Larson. And not only Dr. Larson, but his wife Laura joins us during this interview. I decided to take a different approach interviewing Dr. Larson and Laura. Most people who interview Dr. Larson want to know about demons and what's the most wicked, terrifying paranormal thing you've witnessed as an exorcist, or what is the most common demon you find that you encounter, and yada, yada, yada. I know all of that because he trained me. I'm not interested in that. I want to know, who is Bob Larson? I want to know this on a personal level. And I also want to know, who is Laura? So today in this interview, I'm taking a different approach. I'm going to be going over the history and the life of Dr. Bob Larson. For example, did you know that Dr. Larson was raised on a farm in Nebraska? Did you know that Dr. Larson plays a Gibson Les Paul? Oh, here's another one. Did you know that his wife Laura was studying to become an attorney? Friends, these are the sorts of things I'm interested in. I want to get to know the man, Bob Larson, not necessarily the exorcist. Now, I do touch on his exorcism ministry because it's part of his life. So that's definitely included in here. And for those of you who do not know who Dr. Bob Larson is, this is going to be a great introduction. But in short, he is the #1 Protestant exorcist in the Protestant community. He's performed over 50,000 exorcisms in over 100 countries. He's written a lot of books. Just Google Bob Larson Deliverance or go to Amazon, Bob Larson, and you'll see all the books that he's written. And he trains a lot of people to become exorcists in the Protestant community to help people get free and emotionally heal their lives through deliverance ministry. So this is who he is. By the way, I am going to include links to Dr. Larson's website, YouTube channel, and his Dunamis streaming platform in the show notes. So make sure to check out the show notes. You'll see the links there. Once again, share this out with your family, friends, and on your social media platform. Dr. Larson has been around for such a long time, and there are many people who have followed him through the years, and I think they will really appreciate seeing this kind of personal side to Dr. Larson and Laura, and they're really going to enjoy it. So thank you very much for sharing this out and getting this out to as many people as you can. So without any further ado, I'd love to introduce you to not only the exorcist who God used to free me from my demons, not only the exorcist who trained me in how to be an exorcist, but I'd like to introduce you to my friend, someone who knows the deepest secrets of my life and showed me the compassion and mercy of Jesus Christ as he led me through my healing journey. Let's dive in here and get to know Dr. Bob Larson and Laura Larson. Dr. Bob Larson and Laura Larson, welcome to The Blind Exorcist.
Thank you very much.
We are so excited to be here with you, Justin. This is a great opportunity to share. Thank you for inviting us.
I'm very excited. I've been trying for a while to get you guys on here, and everyone is excited to hear this. So I'm going to step through really your legacy, Dr. Larson. So let's go ahead and just dive in here and start from the beginning. You were born in Nebraska. You were born on a farm, and I'd like to flush that out a little bit. I really appreciate farming. I don't farm as a blind man, but my father was raised on a farm. So I loved hearing about his life on that farm. Now, to you, that might be not a big deal, but for us in the audience, very interesting. So can you share with us, you're on a farm in Nebraska. What was this like for you? Was it, hey, you had to get up and do chores before school, go off to school? What were your chores? What was this like for you being raised on a farm in Nebraska?
First of all, minor correction, I was born in Northern California, where my dad was pastoring a church. He had a heart attack, and in those days, it was very difficult to treat heart disease. So they didn't do much but give them some nitroglycerin and tell them to be careful and breathe lots of oxygen. He could not continue the rigors of pastoring. My mother was raised on a farm in Nebraska. And so he and my mother, my older sister and me, I was 6 months old, headed back to Nebraska to the father-in-law's farm. And that is then where I spent most of my growing up years. So what did I do? I did what you do on farms. I tried to avoid being attacked by the chickens. And there was one rooster who gave me a lot of trouble. My dad said, you just go up and kick him with your cowboy boot and he won't come after you again. And sure enough, it worked. But I collected the eggs. When I got a little older, I did some milking. I had horses. We had sheep, which my dad didn't like, dumbest animals he said he ever saw. And then we had pigs, and Dad didn't like pork, and he said they're just too dirty, so I don't want them either. So we just concentrated on cattle and corn, and that was it. And we didn't have television in the beginning, and they've got a little black and white, and we didn't have much contact with the outside world except, what I learned in school. And I was very active in athletics, all sports. And then, by God's grace, graduated valedictorian of my class and headed off to college. But it was a pretty, how do I say that? A confining existence. But I did have a couple of role models, Dick Cavett and Johnny Carson. They both were from Nebraska, and they made it. So I thought maybe I can too. So I headed off to college, and it was then that I found the Lord, and then that's when things really turned around.
In your time, when you graduated high school, manufacturing and farming were as important as university. What made you decide to go to university rather than pursuing manufacturing or continuing in farming?
Well, the answer to that's pretty simple. On my mother's side, 2 of her brothers were doctors. And then from them, 2 of their sons became doctors. So I was expected to carry on the family tradition and go into medicine. And that was the plan. So I enrolled as pre-med, and I was on my way to going on to medical school. So I was very anxious to get off the farm. And if you've ever been to Western Nebraska, it's pretty barren and it's pretty boring. Good people, but that's just the way it is. I just determined I was going to be a doctor, and I wanted to get out of the prairies. Although I went to the University of Nebraska, which is not really in the prairie. It's getting down by the Missouri River. Changed my life to get me off the farm. And that was pretty ambitious in those days because I think every single classmate that I knew ended up on the family farm continuing the tradition. But I was about to break that. But I didn't know how far I was to break that because then I became a Christian. And as a result of that, I began to rethink what I was doing. But in the meantime, rock and roll had come along and I started a band and I was playing in the bars every weekend. So that was a lot more exciting than picking up chicken eggs.
This is perfect because that was my next question because I'm a guitarist as well. I know you are a guitarist. How did you learn guitar? Did you learn this while you were on the farm? Did somebody teach you on the farm? Or did you learn this during university? And also, what bands were you playing back then? Are you talking like the Beatles or had Black Sabbath come out yet? Like in this rock band. So if you can just give us a little bit of history about that, would be great.
First of all, I got a 3/4, as they called it, a 3/4 Gibson. Means it wasn't full size. And I was like about 10 or 11 years old. And my folks picked it up in a store. And I just started strumming, started teaching myself. And then they got what was to become the classic, but nobody knew it then, a Les Paul Gibson. Now I was really on my way. And I just taught myself to play, sit down and listen to 45s and try to mimic what I heard them doing the best that I could. And my ambitions then was to get together with a band. And we're talking early 60s, late 50s, rock and roll, Chuck Berry, Carl Perkins, Elvis Presley, that kind of an era. And but it was a really big thing then to go out and form a band. Garage bands today are a million a dozen, but back then people just didn't do that. And you're like, "What? You're going to form a band?" But I did, and then we started playing small venues, 500 to 1,000 people, dancing, doing whatever. Then I started playing in clubs, and I was too young to drink. I didn't drink anyway, but so I didn't smoke any weed, so I would play in the band, we'd take a break, and I'd just go outside and get some fresh air. But again, became a Christian, and then that sort of upended all of that, and I decided, I really think I might be called to the ministry."
So you're in university, you become a Christian. Now, your father was a minister, you had mentioned, and he had a bad heart condition. You had moved to Nebraska on the farm. So you were kind of raised around Christianity. So it sounds like this was your own like personal encounter with Christ, where you actually yourself decided to become a Christian. How did that unfold?
First of all, because my father was severely affected, he was basically bedridden for many years, tethered to an oxygen tank just to keep him alive. So there wasn't any going to church. And I just got lost in the shuffle of all of that. And they prayed, they would talk about the Lord. They had Christian friends who would come over to the house and so on, but none of it really interested me at all. And I just didn't fit into what I wanted to do with my life. I wasn't a bad kid. I wasn't in a state of rebellion. I wasn't doing any drugs. I wasn't drinking. Just, I was an athlete and a scholar. That was my intention. But I began to realize that there were going to have to be some changes in my life, and I might not be able to continue on in medicine. I attended a service where there was a man giving his testimony of having found the Lord, an old country and western entertainer who had been famous. I didn't even know who he was. And his name was T. Texas Tyler, and he was famous for back in the 50s of writing a song called The Deck of Cards, which is actually a Christian takeoff on all the different suits and the cards. And I was very impressed with his testimony. I hated his music, but I was really impressed with his testimony. And I went forward at an altar call. And I didn't really know what I was doing, didn't understand it, but I did know it was time to give my life to the Lord. I just intuitively knew that. I think it was part of my spiritual heritage because my father had been in ministry, and my great grandfather on his side was a Lutheran priest who immigrated from Norway. So this was in my DNA, if you want to put it that way.
You're not alone. I've been there, and I believe you. Visit justind.com/help to request a free 20-minute consultation and take the first step toward freedom. Very interesting. Father's ancestry was from Norway, and I remember you'd mentioned to me your mother was German. Was she born here in the States, or did she migrate here from Germany?
She came to the United States as a small child. Her parents were Russian Jews, and they were escaping the Bolsheviks and communism, and they made their way across Germany to America and Ellis Island. And so she really only knew the United States, but so it was quite a mixture. So my grandmother, my dad's side was Irish. I had Norwegian, and you know that'll get you a lot of demons. And then, of course, the Russian Jew on the other side. They spoke German, though. They were in the part of Russia that was in dispute at that time between Germany and Russia.
Very interesting. Very interesting. So, back to university, here you are, you have this Christian experience, you're in this rock band, you're like, I have to stop this. And at a certain point in time, you go on break at university and you decide to buy a ticket to fly all around the world. And during this adventure, you came across a lot of demonic ceremonies and cultures. Can you tell us about a little bit about this whole experience and what you've seen and the impression it had on you as a young man?
Understand, I had never been outside of the United States and only had been out of the state of Nebraska for a yearly trip to California where we had some relatives that never really been east of the Mississippi. But I just thought, I want to go see the world. So I bought a round the world ticket, and that ticket would allow me to have as many stops as I wanted as long as I didn't backtrack. So I took off. I went to Europe. I went to Africa, Asia, India, Southeast Asia, Japan. I really went almost everywhere. And it was, of course, in India mainly, but also in Southeast Asia, that I encountered demonism. And I really didn't know what it was. And I had this interest. People would be talking about some ceremony taking place, and I'd go see it. But in these ceremonies, I would see people go into seizures and writhe on the ground and scream and whatever. And they all said that they were becoming possessed by their gods. And I thought, sounds like what the Bible says about demons, like these demons. And I didn't have an unhealthy curiosity. I was just fascinated by the phenomenon. And I thought, I'm just going to stick this in the back of my mind and maybe I'll run into it again someday in America. And I did.
So you come back to America and I believe you stopped university and you started pursuing like a ministry, a Christian ministry. You were doing motivational speaking. You were starting Christian music. In fact, believe it or not, literally last year on YouTube, I found it just came up in my feed, right? Because I watch your exorcism videos. On my feed comes Bob Larson, and it's a song literally recorded that you did, a Christian contemporary song for its time. And I'm listening to this, and I was like, no. I said, this is not Dr. Larson. He's an exorcist. And so anyhow, you're out there, just to let you know. It was a playlist of a user who had all kinds of artists from that time, and you were in the list. So I just mentioned that for some humor, and you'll have to try to find that song. I don't remember the name. But anyhow, you are traveling around, you're doing Christian motivational speaking, you're singing, and I believe during this time or thereabouts, you encountered your first demon possession with a young girl. Can you tell us a little bit about your singing, your Christian speaking, and then the first encounter you had here in America where a teenager approached you and said, I have sex with the devil?
So what happened is I got back and I got involved in motivational speaking. And at that point in time, there was no social media. A lot of people got their information from school assembly programs where they would have various speakers come and talk about different kinds of topics. And so I heard about some agencies that would book people like that. I thought, that's interesting. I'd like to try that out. So I worked up this lecture on rock and roll and whole the drug scene and so on that was going on with all the hair bands, etc. And so I would come out on stage, play my guitar, and then speak. And it was just basically a sort of an anti-drug lecture. And I would speak briefly about my testimony. But I've traveled. I was speaking about 500 schools a year. But when I would come into a town, I would try to find out in advance through networking if there was a church there that would let me come and share my testimony. So I would speak in the school and then speak in a church that night. And then I'd invite all the kids in the school, and I might have 500 or 1,000 kids I'm speaking to. And then 20 or 30 of them would show up at night to hear my testimony. So that was my way of evangelizing. And then I continued to do that. And as I was doing that, then I had this episode where this young woman walked up to me. I never heard of anything like having sex with a demon. So I just abruptly said to her, let me talk to the demon you have sex with. And then she manifested this spirit, started speaking out of her body. That was my first real personal introduction to the world of the demonic.
I think what's interesting about this situation, I'd like you to explain this a little bit with this young woman. At this time, there was a play out, or it might even have been a movie, this Superstar Jesus, whatever it was called. You'll remember the title. And the spirit that spoke out of her spoke in a British clip dialect. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
That was pretty shocking because this was a 15-year-old girl from a rural community in the middle of Missouri. And suddenly this voice is speaking in this very distinct British accent. And it's a totally different voice. And it's, as demons do, they say all sorts of crazy stuff. But at one point, this demon looked at me. And at that time, Jesus Christ Superstar had just come out as an album. And the live production hadn't come out yet. And it was taking the country by storm. And the demon looks at me and he says, I helped to inspire that. In this British accent. And of course, Rice and Weber, who were the writers and the composers, they were British. And I thought that was pretty interesting. Okay, that doesn't surprise me a bit. You can't have a much more dramatic introduction to your first demon. So to me, it was just so authentic, so real. There was no getting away from it.
If you're ready to confront the demonic torment in your life, I invite you to explore real deliverance through the authority of Jesus Christ. Visit justind.com and request your session today. So this young girl, if memory serves me, so you got this 15-year-old rural young girl, demon manifest, speaking British, saying he inspired and helped write this play. I believe, didn't it quote verbatim some of the verses out of the songs that this young girl would have never heard?
Oh, yeah, this thing was quoting the lyrics, just rattling them right off. I'm like, this girl doesn't know this. This thing has just come out. And, I don't even know if it had reached the backwoods of Missouri yet. Yes. So, I mean, this was stunning. I mean, there was no way around this. This was supernatural. It was very, very clear. And it got my attention. And I thought, okay, I need to know more about this. So I started to study what I could find. And there wasn't much that you could find in those days of anybody talking about this stuff.
So you had to study what you could find, which a lot of the times that brings us back to the Catholic camp because they had been doing exorcisms forever. Did you study much like historical works around exorcism and demonology?
I really didn't. There was one book by Dallas Theological Seminary, Merrill Lunker, called Demons in the World Today. And I found this book. It was really the only thing that I could find. And so I read that. And then there was no internet to do research, so I had to try to find other secular books about the topic. But I didn't know that anybody else did this other than the Catholics. I didn't know that there was any such thing as a deliverance ministry. I didn't understand any of it. But what I did do was in these little lectures that I was giving in the evenings in the churches, I would talk about this. And then it started to happen all over again. I would have people walk up to me and demons would speak out of it. So I thought, I don't know what this is, but it's not happening to anybody else that I know of. And so I would take on these demons the best that I knew how. And it was a pretty fledgling start, but that's how God used it to nudge me in that direction.
So I'm going to fast forward here quite a bit. I know that probably over the years before this started, you were really being taught hands-on and working through a lot of figuring this out. How do you expel these things, generational curses, these sorts of things? But eventually you start a national talk radio show called Talk Back with Bob Larson. Can you explain to us, how did this come to you? Went from a farm in Nebraska to touring the world, demons manifesting that are British and working with these young people. And then fast forward a few years, and now here you are on national radio, Talk Back with Bob Larson, talking about demon possession, talking to witches, also working with death metal bands like Deicide and Morbid Angel, and you even go on tour with Slayer to see if they were actually authentic Satanists, which they turned out not to be. They were just posing to make money off of it. But this is huge. Like, you go from working with teenagers to this era of what I would call your prime. This is a national radio show. You're being interviewed on Oprah, Dr. Phil, all of these things. Hollywood is contacting you to help talk about demon possession in movies. And so there's a lot going on here, but at the root of it, Talk Back with Bob Larson is what I think really launched you. How did this start?
It started because I got the idea, if I'm going to give my testimony and then go speak in these churches, there are Christian radio stations. And so I thought, why don't I try to talk these Christian radio stations to giving me a day or two for a few hours to talk about my experiences and preach the gospel. And so I was an anomaly back then because of all the things we've described. So I got a series of radio stations. So I started adding to my schedule these local radio stations where I would go on. And I'd say, give me a couple of hours every couple of days and let's just take some phone calls and see what happens. And to their shock, it was a big hit, so to speak, because people were fascinated by this. Nobody did anything like that. And one day, a radio station owner said to me, I don't understand why you're traveling all over the country and doing this. There's this new thing called satellite radio. Why don't you just stay in one place and then feed that to all the rest of the radio stations? Back then, the only guy doing anything live by satellite and radio was Larry King. And I thought, eventually they'd call me the Christian Larry King because I was the first guy to go do this. And so I put together an investment group. I said, look, I need some help. I want to go on Christian radio stations and they don't have a satellite dish. And back then, those dishes were like 10 feet wide, not these little tiny ones like today, huge things. So if I can buy a bunch of these and I can give them to a Christian station in exchange for daily airtime to do a talk show, would you be willing to go along with that? So I found a group of people who helped me to do that. So we went out and bought a couple hundred satellite dishes, loaded up on semi trucks, and started sending them all over the country. And they'd pull up at a Christian station and say, how would you like to have one of these? And they would all say, what is it? You can get live satellite programs, because everything was being sent around on little cassette tapes. They said, what? Yeah, let us just put this in your backyard. And there's this guy, Bob Larson. If you just give him an hour a day, he'll pay for this and put it in your backyard. It was a deal they couldn't refuse. And so we built this network, ended up with 200 stations, just one station at a time, pouring concrete and sticking a big 20-foot, 20-foot dish in their backyard. And they were really excited about it. So it was just a God thing, that little entrepreneurialism and the work of the Holy Spirit, and there you have it. And so it took off. What happened, though, the key was I'd only been doing it a couple of months, and a Satanist calls me on the radio, and he wants to take me on. And so I share the gospel with him, and I convince him live on the air to give his heart to Jesus. And he does. Well, what made it interesting was that I, at that time, was originating my show from Denver, and this guy was actually from Denver. So I said, come down to my studio and bring all your satanic stuff. So he comes down to the studio and he brings all his satanic paraphernalia and books, and we go out in the backyard and we burn all this stuff, and I report on it. That lit a fire in Christian radio. Nobody's ever done this before. Nobody's even thought of this. Who would even do this? And God used that adventurousness, spiritual prodding of the Lord. I see it all now as God putting things together to get me where we are today.
And I could go on about all of the guests you've had. There's just so much here. And for those of you listening, Dr. Larson has a website called Exorcisms, which has all of his Talk Back with Bob Larson radio show episodes. So if you would like to go listen to those, you can. You can just go to boblarson.org, and there's a link to Exorcisms right there that you can click on and sign up and dive in. So for the sake of time, I'm going to skip over this, but I mean, he was constantly dealing with demon possession live on the air. Demons were manifesting. Satanists were calling. There were people in covens wanting out. He would help people get out of covens and bring them to safety. He would work, like I said previously, with these death metal bands would call, like Deicide, Morbid Angel. These were back in the 90s where these guys were Satanists who were into real extreme metal. He got involved with Christian metal bands, Deliverance, Tourniquet, Mortification, and others. He actually did a concert with Tourniquet where he played guitar with Tourniquet. I wish I could find a clip of that. That'd be neat. But anyhow, there's a lot there to check out. Now, Laura, finally we get to you. I know during this time at some point you and Dr. Larson meet. How did you and Dr. Larson meet for the first time?
Well, it was an interesting meeting. I was interviewing for a position at Bob Larson Ministry, which at that time was based in Denver, Colorado. He had a huge office and a huge building at that time. And so we had a staff of, oh my goodness, maybe 30. So I was being interviewed for a position as a special events coordinator. I was taking a break before law school, so I thought, well, I'll work in a ministry. I think that's a good thing to do. And so little did I know it would change my life. But so I was walking in to be interviewed and by somebody else, his vice president. And he walked out of the elevator and he saw me and he jumped. And it was a surprise because I wasn't sure who he was. And then I just really think at that time it was the Holy Spirit. God knew what our obviously the destiny was for us. And he let us know pretty quickly. I was hired and then we worked together for a little bit. And then it was just evident to us. The Lord really revealed to us that we were the pair, and it just went very smoothly from there.
Okay, so it's not every day someone says, I want to marry an exorcist. So how was your family with this whole idea of, because this is extreme, right? Exorcism is a very extreme ministry, and most people struggle with that, especially in America. How was your family, mom, dad, siblings, with the idea of you marrying an exorcist?
Well, my mother was in ministry at that time. She was an executive assistant at a ministry, and she loved the work of Bob Larson Ministries. So really, when I met Bob, he had, I think, 200 station. He had a daily radio program, and there was a lot of things he was talking about. He did some of the exorcisms on air, but it was a portion of what he did. And so once we got married, we would do deliverances and exorcisms after hours. So he would do all these radio shows, and then after hours, he would do the exorcisms. So it was very grueling, that schedule. So anyway, excuse me, I got a little bit off track there. But so that was a portion. He was more of a Christian radio talk show host, is really how I saw him at the time. So my family, even with that distinction, my family learned a bit about him in the beginning. They were not sure. And again, my mother loved him immediately because, of course, she was in ministry and the Holy Spirit was influencing her, but she loved him. So everyone else grew to love Bob, but sometimes early on, especially, they didn't understand that aspect of the ministry. And, really, Bob has stood the test of time with the anointing and calling, and that speaks for itself. They've grown to love Bob, and they have seen the fruit of thousands of people helped, lives restored, and people living for Christ. And so that is something that is extraordinarily compelling. That, to me, it really speaks for itself, and that part of the ministry, and that's easy to understand. But as you know, it can be a challenge, and people don't really understand. They think, what is this? This is scary stuff. Because I think the movie The Exorcist really threw people off from what true deliverance, true exorcism is.
Thank you very much for sharing that. I think that's the reality for most people who are exorcists, especially in family or even in Christian contexts, that we're looked at as strange, because in America, this is very strange. But go to Nigeria, oh, they'd be excited. Come on in, help us. I have a friend in Singapore. I mention this often on the show here that, over there, when someone gives their life to Jesus Christ in her church, the first thing they do, literally, is put them through an exorcism because culturally, they understand all of the religious influence and ancestor worship and Taoism and just different things that are in the culture. In America, though, very challenging. Laura, so you and Dr. Larson, you guys start having children and you guys are touring around. You guys are in Australia. I know Ukraine. There's been a lot of other countries, Dr. Larson, you've been to, and you're bringing this global now around the world and performing these live exorcisms in churches and different venues. Laura, what was that like with children and traveling around the world? What challenges did you find? I know there's also reward in doing this, but that had to be tough because I got 4 kids myself. And so I know it can be, especially with traveling. How did that unfold for you?
That's a great question, Justin. And it was tremendous being able to travel with Bob. We just decided that we needed to keep our family together. And even though traveling with young children is very difficult, it's something that we committed to. And I'll just give you a little snapshot as to one of the challenges. We went to South Africa, and our youngest was crawling. She had just started crawling. And we were in a hotel room that was provided by the church. I laid down sheets everywhere so that she could crawl. And at one point, the housekeeping service came in and they were tidying up. And I just happened to look at the time that the person who was cleaning put the mop to clean the mop out, put it into the toilet. So kind of got the water and squeegeed the water out in the toilet. And I just thought, oh my goodness, that really threw me for a loop. And so it was just, there were many different standards when it came to cleanliness, and it might have just been that hotel, but it was really surprising. And then another time, same hotel, Bob went to meet the pastor, and it was wonderful. And he went off for a little while. So I thought, I'm going to take the children just across the street with a carriage and all. I'm going to take them across the street because the ocean is just right across the street. I'm so excited. So I start walking in the lobby, and the woman at the front desk said, "Excuse me, ma'am, may I ask where you're going?" And I thought it was such a strange question. And I said, "Yes, I'm just going to walk right across the street, just really quickly show the kids the ocean." And she said, "I would not recommend you did that without a few men with you." And I was just, again, very surprised. These were all these different challenges and experiences. And other times we were able to meet leaders in the government. We were able to meet so many amazing people from the different countries and cultures, and they would welcome us in and introduce us to so much different foods and experiences. So that, coupled with me being a homeschooling mom, was the best, because I was able to teach them about all these different cultures, all these different countries. And we, not by book, but we could just go and experience. And they would fill out little forms, and I'd take pictures, and we would create unit studies. So it was such a fun time. But there were a lot of challenges. If you think of 3 children under the age of 9, well, let's say 6, on a plane, and it's a 12-hour plus flight, that's a challenge. That is a challenge for any woman, any couple. So we had those challenges, and not to complain, because it was just what God had us do. And so he gave us so much grace. He gave us many blessings as we were able to travel.
Thank you very much. Yeah, that pretty much summarizes, I think, for most people that's worked with kids, whether you're in ministry or not, it can be very challenging. So thank you. All right, so we're getting close to wrapping up here, but I do want to come back to you, Dr. Larson. I know, unfortunately, I know one time you had your ribs broken. I believe that was in Australia. Someone tackled you, and there was a stage behind you at your rib level and broke your ribs. You had to fly home. There's been some tough things in your travels around the world. I know also, I think it's your oldest daughter. She did some exorcism with you, some training, some of her friends. Can you tell us a little bit about that? And then I've got one more question for you, and we'll wrap it up here.
There are many different directions that the ministry has taken. And our whole family was vested in this ministry at one time or another. They saw it, they experienced it. Each of my daughters has been present from time to time when I have been praying with somebody. So they recognize the reality of spiritual warfare. And yes, they've seen me physically assaulted. They've seen me be involved in potentially violent situations, especially in some overseas cultures. But they always see Christ triumph. They always see Jesus come through, and they never see me have anything that's permanently sustainable in terms of any injuries or problems as a result of what I do. What they have seen, though, are thousands upon thousands of lives that have been changed. They have met these people, they know their testimonies. So, from a family standpoint, they see a side of life that not everyone gets to see. And they have had the chance to see it up close and personal. And I wish more families believed in deliverance, were involved in deliverance, and would raise their children with the knowledge of spiritual warfare, which is so obvious to any discerning Christian as it takes place all around us in so many different quarters. It gives them a deeper understanding of good and evil and the grace of God and how important it is to walk with the Lord because they see what happens to people who haven't walked with the Lord or whose ancestors or whose family have not walked with the Lord, and they see the devastation that has caused. That's the biggest takeaway. And people who don't believe in deliverance are missing an opportunity both to see the raw, demonic evil of the kingdom of darkness, but also the miraculous power of God when it sets people free and the joy and the lightness and the transformation that their lives undergo. That's really the biggest takeaway. Jesus is real. The devil is real. Eternity is real when you get involved in casting out demons.
Absolutely. And all four of my children are perfectly comfortable with exorcism. To your point, yes, it's wonderful to have my children invested in and around in this. So I want to thank you, Dr. Larson and Laura, for coming on and sharing your lives with all of us. This has been amazing. And at the end of every episode, I always ask my guests to leave a word of encouragement to people because there's a lot of people that listen to this podcast here that are Christian and they know that they have demons, but they struggle to go for an exorcism because of fear. And there's other Christians that listen that are just skeptical, so they come here. And I also have quite a few people listen that aren't Christians, right? People into the New Age and all of these different practices because this is just another spiritual avenue for them to explore. So I've got all these different types of listeners, but at the end, I really like our guests to encourage people. So Dr. Larson, with your years of experience, you have done over 50,000 exorcisms in over 100 countries. With all of that experience, and Laura, I'm going to come to you after Dr. Larson shares for you to encourage the people. What would you say to somebody, Dr. Larson? Why should they go for an exorcism?
The first reason that people should seek deliverance from the powers of darkness is because it's biblical. Christ did it. People needed it. He commanded his disciples to do it. It's part of the Great Commission. It's unavoidable. And it's one of the ways in which people divest themselves of the evil that has been in their family, in their bloodlines, and in their background to get a real new start on life. That is the first thing. Secondly, you lose all doubt, if you've ever had any, about eternity, about the veracity of the Bible, about the importance of Christian living, because you see what happens to people who don't participate in those Christian values and beliefs, and in fact, become victims of very real demonic forces. So the fact that there's a God and there's a devil, and we're down here on earth in the midst of that, needing to make a choice, it's very stark. It's very real. It's not theologically abstract. It's an important decision that we make every day of our lives as to how we will conduct ourselves, whether or not we will be influenced by the Holy Spirit or be influenced by evil spirits. So the raw reality of that, to me, is the biggest takeaway. It removes every doubt. There are no atheists in an exorcism.
Thank you, Dr. Larson. And Laura, how about you? What words of encouragement can you offer to people listening? Why should they get an exorcism or go through deliverance?
That's really easy for me. I am very blessed. Many times people come into the office and I am able to share with them when they are nervous, when they don't know what to expect. I can talk to them, relate to them, and share a few things that are really important. And that is number one, you're not walking into a judgmental chamber, so to speak. It is a place that people care for you. They're anointed by Christ to do this work, and they want to help you. They're on your team. And I think that is such a fundamental shift in the way you have to look at this, that people are really there for you. They're not ready to throw your sins back in your face, but they're ready to really walk you through those things. Because sometimes finding out why those sins occurred is phenomenal. You realize the enemy set you up for the life you have led. And so that's very important. And then I'm very blessed, and Bob and our whole staff is so blessed to see lives changed. Lives changed. Sometimes it takes pain to get results, or takes reflection to get results. And what I mean by that is looking at things that can be very difficult to look at. But that's the way you overcome them. And I think that fruit of seeing so many people's lives changed is what just keeps us going forward. And the sad stories are eclipsed by the beautiful victories. And I think that Christ loves our humble hearts when we say, here's what I've got. I've got to get rid of this stuff. And as a mom, it's so much more for me. It's not to say that it's not about the individual sometimes. Sometimes it's for the children. And breaking those generational patterns and curses and behavioral patterns are so important for future generations. And the children, your grandchildren, and future generations, you won't even know, you won't even see, except in heaven, the result of what you choose to do to get free. So I encourage you, hand out, walk into it.
If you're facing torment, fear, or something you can't explain, you're not alone. I've walked with many people through deliverance, and I've seen Jesus bring real freedom. If you're ready to take that first step, go to justind.com and book an appointment with me. I'd be honored to walk with you. on your healing journey.